Happy WrestleMania and NBA playoff weekend, folks, to those who celebrate. And also the whole Jesus thing with Easter. You know, they're trying to take a little bit of Jesus's shine. I'm sure he's not too pleased with that. But obviously, I'll be watching NBA playoffs and WrestleMania all weekend this weekend. But we still have to talk about some stuff. There's a couple different stories that I want to put kind of just into this one video involving Nintendo Switch 2 games. And, you know, some of these are more interesting than others, but I think they're all worth talking about. And we'll kind of get into that as the story goes along, including the final story, which I guess in theory makes sense, but it does open up some potential interesting opportunities for game developers. So the first thing I want to talk about is Nintendo has provided a update on the backwards compatibility for Nintendo Switch 2 and Nintendo Switch 1 games. Now, obviously, if you look at the list of Switch 1 games that have some sort of issue on Switch 2, there's really no sort of rhyme or reason to why certain games do and certain games don't. It's not like there's a certain engine that's a problematic thing. It's because of the fact that, I mean, this is essentially emulation on the Nintendo Switch 2, which is what MVG said all along. Yet all these Twitter dorks who have never made a video game, you have never made a video game ever. You could sit there and study something for years. I could sit there and study pro wrestling until I'm in a pro wrestling match. I'm not an expert on that. The wrestler knows more. The game developer knows more. So MBG was 100% right, and people were so weird towards him. And I took notes of those people. But it's not so much about the games that have been updated on the backwards compatibility list, because it's like fitness, boxing, and Fortnite and stuff like that. More so, it's about the fact that Nintendo is actively updating this list, which means that if there are games that are on the list of Switch 1 games that have a problem on Switch 2, then, you know, more than likely that will be addressed. Obviously, there's going to be outliers. You're not going to be able to use your Labo set on the Switch 2 for the 4 people who still have Labo and the dog didn't eat the cardboard box of it or anything like that. So unfortunately, you'll have to keep your Switch 1 if you want to play that. But I think this is very promising just from the standpoint of they're actually doing stuff with this. They are actively updating the games that are available on there. And more than likely, there's always going to be like a handful of maybe problematic games, but the vast majority of them should work on the Nintendo Switch 2. The second thing we're going to talk about with the Nintendo Switch 2 and game stuff is a new game reveal according to the PEGI ratings board, which of course is the ratings board in Europe. And this one was kind of interesting to me. Assassin's Creed Shadows, the new game that came out, of course, on PS5, Xbox Series, and the PC, has been spotted with a Nintendo Switch 2 rating on the PEGI rating board, which pretty much means that Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, Assassin's Creed Shadows is a game that I played for about, I don't know, roughly 15 hours, 16 hours or so. I actually had to remove it off of my hard drive because my Xbox hard drive was full and I needed to download something else. I don't think it's a bad game. I think there are flaws within the game, such as the atrocious voice acting, but you know, which kind of takes you out of the game, honestly. But like, I don't think it's a bad game or anything like that. I just don't think it's like this huge savior that's going to, you know, make Ubisoft a bunch of money and everyone's going to love them again. But I think from a technical perspective, this could be a very interesting sort of litmus test for the Nintendo Switch 2, because of the fact that this is a pretty graphically demanding game. I'm playing the game, or I played the game, I should say, on the Xbox Series X. And yeah, there was little issues here and there, but for the most part, this was actually a really gorgeous looking game. And I'm wondering how the Switch 2 performance of this game is going to stack up. Now, from a business perspective, this makes complete sense, because obviously Ubisoft is trying to get as much money as they can because they need money. So by putting stuff like Star Wars Outlaws, which, I'm sorry, there's really no redeeming factors with that game. I know they fixed a bunch of stuff with it, but it's still not a good game. Like, if you had to pick between Assassin's Creed Shadows and Star Wars Outlaws, Assassin's Creed Shadows by a country mile. Like that is definitely the better game, but they're definitely both Ubisoft games at the core. But from the technical perspective, I think that's pretty interesting just because of the fact that, this is kind of a heavy hitter title when you're talking about graphics, when you're talking about performance. How is the Nintendo Switch 2 version going to hold up? And I think, there was a lot of comparisons with Switch 1 games to games that were available on the PS4 and the Xbox One, and then by extension, the PS5 and the Xbox Series. And I think the Switch 2 comparisons are going to be just as interesting. And I'll probably be doing them for you because for some reason, Ubisoft still gives me review copies of games from time to time. So I could probably get Assassin's Creed Shadows. But are you excited for Assassin's Creed Shadows to be coming to the Switch too? Let me know in the comments down below. And the final thing we're going to talk about. Now, we're talking about Rune Factory, Guardians of Azuma. And I know what you're saying. RGT, why are you talking about Rune Factory, Guardians of Azuma? You don't seem like a Rune Factory guy. To be fair, the first Rune Factory on the DS was a bop. I actually really liked that game. I thought it was super fun. I like playing RPGs in handheld mode because it kind of gives you time to play. I think that's honestly why, I'm still playing Xenoblade Chronicles X, even though I've beaten the game. It's because I like playing in handheld mode. And if I got something on the TV, I could just throw the game on the handheld mode and do a couple missions that I might have missed out on or something like that. But I don't follow the Rune Factory franchise or anything like that, but Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma is a game that is coming out on both the Nintendo Switch 1 and the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, there has been some confusion about things involving that, and I don't think this really helps the situation, even though this is kind of an FAQ. So basically, they tell you what's new for the Switch 2 edition. You get higher resolution visuals, faster frame rates, Joy-Con 2 mouse functionality, blah, blah, blah. You get the upgrade pack as well. How much does it cost to upgrade? It is $10 depending on your region, or 15 Australian. It'll be available on launch day. Basic stuff with this. But the part that everyone is finding interesting is, what is the physical Nintendo Switch 2 edition? The Nintendo Switch 2 edition is a red 64GB game card that includes in full the Nintendo Switch game and the upgrade pack. There's no need to download the full game. Simply insert the card into either a Nintendo Switch or Nintendo Switch 2 console, and the correct version will launch automatically. Like most modern titles, there may be small updates or patches available at launch to provide minor fixes and gameplay improvements, but rest assured, the complete game is on the game card, ready to play day one. So people kind of looked at this and they're like, oh, the 64GB game cartridge once again rears its head. And it seems like that is quickly becoming a standard for a lot of Nintendo Switch 2 games. Allegedly, Mario Kart World is going to be on a 64GB cartridge. We know that Cyberpunk is on a 64GB cartridge. And now this Rune Factory game is also on one. But the more interesting thing to me is this. So you simply insert the card into either a Switch or a Switch 2 console, and the correct version will launch automatically, which technically means that if you buy the Switch 2 edition of the game, that of course is the red card, as they say here, and it has the Switch 2 stuff on there, but you pop it into your Switch 1, it'll still play the Switch 1 version of the game. So it's not just, Switch 2 version for the Switch 2, Switch 1 version for the Switch 1. You can actually play. So in theory, and I know this is something that's kind of insequential in the grand scheme of things, but I actually really like this. I actually think this is really cool because in theory, let's say you plan on buying a Switch 2 and you want the Switch 2 edition, but like that you don't have the Switch 2. You could play the game on the Switch 1 and then play it on the Switch 2 with that same game cartridge. You could do it for comparisons as well. It's almost like forwards compatibility with these cartridges. And obviously this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, but if you think about something like Metroid Prime 4, I mean, theoretically speaking, it should kind of be the same way. And when you think about games like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, it's probably going to be the same way. And I know it's a small thing, but we have been kind of negative about a lot of Nintendo things, and rightfully so on this channel. I'm not one of those positivity people, peddlers, who everything's great. You're all just haters. Like, you're a dork for not being critical of things and just glossing over people's genuine concerns. But I think this is really cool. And I think this is something good. And I think it's something that should be talked about more. If this is going to be the case for most Switch 2 games that also work on Switch 1 or have a Switch 1 version, like your Switch 2 edition of the game will be applicable to the Switch 1 version. Because like Split Fiction 2, you can actually stream, because that game's not coming out on the Switch 1. Or not Split Fiction 2. Is that the name? Yeah, Split Fiction. You can stream the Switch 2 version of the game, which is the only version available on a Nintendo platform, to the Switch 1 and play the game. Like, I don't know. I think that's cool stuff. And I think that's something that should be celebrated. So, a lot of interesting things happening over on the software side of things for Nintendo with the Switch 2. Does any of this interest you? And if not, thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. I thought these were interesting topics, though. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.